He's in the middle of the project. It still seems like he's got a lot to go, but I probably would keep going on it. I don't know.
Yeah. So if you stop, do you tear off the hardy plank and put cedar back up? Like
That's what
the
I was
heck?
wondering too.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Digital Brand Manager Rob Watak.
Morning, Patrick.
Good to see you, Rob.
Too.
Kiley Jacques, Design Editor.
Hello.
And Producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
It's good to see you all this morning.
Likewise.
Yep, miss you guys.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Woo! It's
Here we
going
are
to be
again.
a great show today, you all. So, Kiley, I can't wait another second. I learned yesterday that you were having septic system problems, and of all the things that can go wrong with a house, I think this is the most scary because it just involves spending large amounts of money on a hole in the ground.
You see all this gray hair on my head? I lost a lot of sleep over this. I'm a catastrophist, so I asked the guy, what's the worst case scenario? What happened was on Saturday, and there were some symptoms leading up to it, but on Saturday, I put in a load of laundry and my washing machine agitated my toilet, and then before I knew it, I had sewage backing up in my tub.
Oh my God.
And so I'm freaking out.
My
And
God.
prior to that, I should have known something was up. And I did. I just ignored it. When I ran my washing machine, the water would bubble up in the lawn outside the bulkhead. And I know where my septic system is, so I should have dealt with it earlier. But anyway, the long and the short of it is I had an emergency service. The guy came and he cleared out the main line, and then somebody else came and sucked the tank clean, and they discovered it wasn't working properly. So he came back to do the investigative work yesterday. But when he was here on Saturday, I asked him, okay, I have no idea. I've never dealt with a septic system before. Tell me what might be happening here. And he threw out the $25,000 to $35,000 figure, and it would just stuck in my brain, and I lost a lot of sleep over it. So I was very pleased to learn that essentially there was just a clog between the pipe that leads from the tank to the leach field. The leach field is intact, so it cost me about $1,000 to fix total. He's going to come back with a product called Cess Flow, and he's going to add about 5 gallons of that to, pour it down so that it reaches the leach field and does its magic.
How long did it take to get someone out there to take a look at this?
I was so impressed. I got to tell you, it's money well spent in terms of the timeliness of those guys. They both showed up immediately. I actually called a plumbing company who then sent me over to this guy. And anyway, yeah.
What?
I learned a lot about my septic system. I know where everything's located. I know how it functions.
Oh man, Kiley, that is super scary.
Yeah.
So when my parents moved into their house, I think it was 1963, almost immediately they started having effluent surfacing in the backyard.
Is that what it's called? Effluent surfacing? That's not what I would call it.
Well, this is the reason why my wife is thrilled about us living in town, because the sewer treatment plant, as much as we don't want to be a neighbor to it, is very close by. And so there's a pipe going out to the street and then down the street, and that's all we got to think about. We're only responsible for 20 feet of pipe.
Mm.
So your situation, Kiley, is especially difficult because you are probably on, very close to the water table and near that river.
Yeah, I was. In a sense, I'm sort of glad to understand the system. And yeah, my leach field is actually probably about 25 feet from the river. Mm-hmm. So that's why it would have been so expensive. He explained to me the complications surrounding that proximity. So Man
Yeah,
alive, if that better be the last. I'm so tired of thinking about my septic system.
Yeah, Kiley's house.
It's disgusting, and it's time to move on to more pleasant topics.
Well, your house is in what's sort of like an old fishing camp community, and those types of places are notorious for having substandard septic systems. And then nowadays, it'd be even tough to even put a legally put a septic system in there.
The guy that came is familiar with my road in my neighborhood and has worked down here for years and years. And it was talking about the floods that have happened and how, there's been a lot of talk apparently around just getting rid of all these houses and not allowing people to live here. And part of it is how to deal with the septic. And, there's 8 houses here that are all in the same boat. So anyway.
It's not an uncommon problem, Kiley.
$1,000 feels like pennies.
Oh, you lucked out, sister. I tell you,
lucked out. But you know what? I deserve that break.
My parents had to get a second mortgage on their house almost immediately to fix their system.
I started looking. It's because I don't think homeowners insurance covers that kind of thing. I think you need to just take out a loan and pay for it. Yep.
Yeah. So when my wife and I moved into our Stowe house, almost immediately in the spring, when this snow melt happens, we started having backups into the basement, and we had to put a new septic system in, and I did it. I rented a backhoe, and I ordered truckloads of gravel, and I put in a pump system with a sand mound, and I did it myself because the estimates I got were as much as $20-some thousand and as little as 15, I think. And I figure I did it for about $9,000, and I would never do it again.
How long did it take you?
So I took a week off of work, and by the end of the week, we had a functioning septic system that was inspected by the designer, and then it took a lot more time than to get grass growing again and the landscape restored. Right, when you have a little lot, it makes a huge mess. Where you been, Rob? What have you been doing?
Well, as I've said multiple times, gardening is the main focus this time of year. But I'm finally getting into some other projects. I sent you guys along some pictures of that boat rack I made for my kayak. And being a metal guy, I always think, oh, what kind of elaborate frame can I build? I wanted to be able to put 3 boats in the bed of my pickup truck, 3 kayaks, and it was like doing all kinds of research, looking for fancy rack systems, and nothing was really looking the way that I wanted to do it. So I was just going to fabricate something out of metal. And then I was like, you know what? I just want to get out on the water. So I was like, what can I do quickly? And I grabbed a sheet of plywood. I cut 3 scalloped sort of like notches into it, the width of wide enough to fit the kayaks, and sandwiched it between some 2x4s that sort of make this little table trestle frame that sits in the back of the bed, and it worked perfectly. I got the boats. It takes like a minute for me to load all 3 boats in there and strap them down. It's so nice, and does
that come out like?
It's basically a sheet of plywood with the 3 notches and pipe insulation, foam and pipe insulation, so I don't scratch up the boats, and then. There's 2 2x4s in parallel with a gap, the thickness of the plywood between them, and then 2 little legs at the end to keep it from tipping over that just wedge in between the wheel wells and the tailgate area. Cool. And awesome. The plywood just slides right out of the top, and then the 2x4s come out after, and then they store flat in my shed when I'm not using them.
It's awesome design, man.
So awesome.
And made entirely with stuff I took 5 minutes to run around my barn and my shed to look for scraps of junk I had. I actually went in the basement to some of the defunct heating pipes and ripped the foam insulation off of them to make the padding.
Awesome. I'm glad it wasn't asbestos.
Yeah, no. And the thing is, if I tear those foam insulation pieces up, I've got like 20 more of them on the rest of my old heating system in the basement.
You can start selling those things, Rob.
Yeah.
What have you been doing, Jeff?
Not a whole lot. Lots of little stuff, exciting things like washing screens and windows and windowsills.
I hate that kind of stuff. I washed my air conditioners, my window air conditioners this weekend, and there was like the most disgusting layer of biofilm in there, and I'm sure it was like blowing into the house.
Okay, it can't compare to my shampoo and soap scum in my septic tank.
Oh, that's so nasty in there.
We don't want to hear about
did you look
that
in
was
there?
the problem. That stuff is the problem. And I use eco products. It's still a problem. Anyway.
Did you look in there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I looked in there.
Yeah. I bet you never want to look in there again. So I washed the air conditioners and put those in the windows because it was super hot. And Carol's been the real go-getter around the homestead here. She's been doing lots of gardening, and she's been working on the steps that connect our barn's deck to the patio she built last year and our fire ring. So admittedly, I've been watching her work sometimes. Sometimes she knows it and sometimes she doesn't.
So you actually turned the air conditioners on already?
I did on Saturday of last week because it was hot, but I haven't used them since.
See, my family, I got the mini splits. All I got to do is flip a switch. But my wife and daughter were like, "Oh yeah, let's turn the air conditioner on." I'm like, "No, it's spring.
Yeah,
we got fans. You got the window screens."
Carol and I were talking about how we used to live without air conditioning, and I never would want to live without air conditioning again, unless I lived in someplace super cold, right? It's too nice to be able to sleep in cool temperatures.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
So we spent, collectively probably $300 on 2 window air conditioners. It cools the whole house. It's one of the virtues of having a small home.
Yeah.
Oh, so we got some great feedback on past shows this week, and I'm going to launch right into that. So first we heard from Tess. Hey, FHB podcast. I got a chuckle out of your question in episode 247 about how Minnesotans and Canadians survived before modern insulation and heating. While I'm not a native Minnesotan, I spent my formative years in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and have some insights into your question. The answer, saunas. When Finnish immigrants began to move to the Great Lakes in the mid-1800s, they brought their sweatbox traditions with them, to the chagrin of their more modest neighbors. Often when a Finn began their homestead in Minnesota, they'd actually build a sauna before they'd build a house. Nothing like living in a one-room shack that was nightly stoked to 195 to 200 degrees in order to bathe with your family, which to survive in places that experience minus 40 or 200 to 300 inches of snow wasn't a bad idea. The oldest sauna known to date is the Cokato Sov Sauna, which was built in 1868. Unfortunately, this building had to be moved from its original roadside location because the non-Finnish neighbors complained about public nudity and demanded its removal. Needless to say, the Finns' ingenuity wasn't quite socially accepted. There's a great book about the history of the sauna, which you can find here. We'll put that web link on our podcast page. My earliest memories include weekly trips to the sauna house. Needless to say, it gave me great joy to find this book. One interesting thing you'll notice in the photography is that while each of the sauna structures follows the same basic principle, there's quite a variety in the architecture. There's also a great chapter dedicated to the engineering of the sauna stove. So, Kiley, when you lived in New Hampshire,
my eyes lit up when I saw this email. I'm a big fan of the sauna.
I did not know that.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
I feel like I'm talking about saunas all the time. Yeah.
Sounds like we need to build another shed in your property.
Well, you asked Justin, I've been mentioning saunas as a story idea since I was hired. So, yeah, this is great. I support that idea.
It must be a thing that's very common in cold places because northern Vermont had a similar kind of sauna tradition, right?
Yeah.
And some of my back to the land friends that I worked with at JLC had saunas and did it regularly in the wintertime.
Well, I'm going to say, when you don't do it, like right now, it's not available to me because my gym is closed. But if you're somebody who really finds it beneficial and you're not able to do it, you really notice a difference in your physical health. If you're accustomed to it and you're a believer in the sauna, going without it is not easy.
So we also heard from our friend Ian Schwant, who used to work at Hudson Valley Preservation and has since moved to Wisconsin. He says, hey, podcasters, in 2019, when I was still residing in the Northeast, I had the opportunity to take in a lot of BS schooling. And this is in reference to our question about building science curriculum. And I was also working for a contractor who was a member of NESI, the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. Admittedly, I did not know much about BS before engaging in these opportunities. Classes I attended: Building Science Corporation, Renovation/Rehabilitation. Great class, highly recommended. Go for the BS, stay for the open bar. Yes, tomorrow. Net zero insulation strategies. Very nerdy. Learn basic energy modeling and U-factor calculations. Great instructors who are committed to being available to students post-class. Association for Energy Affordability, Passive House Tradesperson. Unbelievably nerdy. Some concepts were difficult. Learned advanced energy modeling techniques and PHPP. The PHP is the Passive House Planning Package, for those of you who don't know. And those of you who do, I bet you're sorry you learned it. We learned how to set up a blower door test. Passed a proctored exam that bestowed upon me cool initials to put after my name. Take that, third grade teacher who said I'd never amount to test taking. One thing that stands out to me in the experience is the amount of things I learned or read that contradicted something else I had learned or read. Digging deeper into these contradictions was where I learned the most. Building science is a wide-ranging topic, mind-boggling, nuanced, if you want to add carbon accounting to the BS, as some do, with many different standards and practices that work in one climate zone but not in another, and value different building materials in different ways. Our friend Andy Engel has been known to refer to passive house window U-factor specs as a fetish. My advice to others is to soak up all the information you can, but the devil is very deep in the details, and you will not learn as much unless you keep digging and continue to reevaluate what you think you know as you dig. Ian Schwant, CPHT.
So, you know, one thing about that is that the building science, it's all physics, you know, it's all about heat transfer and moisture transfer. And you got to understand.
Stop you right there. It is not
it's thermodynamics.
And
right?
It's also assemblies and like material science. And it's so much.
Yeah.
And as he suggests, some people are counting carbon, you know, as part of the equation. So it's insanely complicated.
I have a definition right here that I'm going to look up for you.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because I'm studying this material.
What do you think of it so far?
I'm really into it. It might be pretty rudimentary for you guys, but I think it's a nice pace at which they develop the material. So, but I am looking that up because it specifically says physics, thermodynamics, and I'm already forgetting what the third thing is they define building
So I'm going to read
as.
Rosanna's letter, which is related in the
Chemistry.
meantime. Yeah, chemistry, material science. Water movement is a huge part of it. You know, 4 different ways water moves through buildings. Mm-hmm. So Rosanna says, hello, I just finished listening to episode 247, which discussed ways to learn about building science. Are you familiar with the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants? They offer many educational opportunities. Professionals can also earn recognition in various ways. For example, there are over 50 registered building enclosure consultants. I enjoy the podcast and work professionally with commercial buildings and appreciate the exposure to residential construction. Well, thanks, Rosanna. So go ahead, man.
You know, in that Train the Trainer video series that I told Kiley about on Green Building Advisor, it was a course taught by Peter Yost a bunch of years ago for training Green Raiders. One thing he pointed out is that there are universities around the country that have architectural engineering programs which focus on building science, but he said that they're very rare, and it's just interesting how many people are in the building professions and what small percentage of them are trained specifically in building science.
Yeah.
Or and trained in anything. So we also heard from Ethan. Hello, in response to listener feedback about mini splits, I'm not sure this is any help, but on Mitsubishis at least, there's a constant temperature setting which will switch from heating to cooling depending on what is necessary. I learned this the hard way because I had the setting accidentally chosen on a moderate winter day, and in the early afternoon, my unit switched to cooling mode due to the solar heat gain in the house. I was quite surprised to feel cold air blowing on me until I realized that my unit was working to maintain a set temperature rather than just backing off when warm temperatures had been achieved. I've attached a photo of the handheld controller setting indicating a mode in which a constant temperature can be maintained. I don't see any use for this myself, but it could be useful in industrial or scientific settings, or if someone has very distinct indoor temperature needs. Thanks for the podcast. Well, thanks for that information, Ethan. What I love about Mitsubishi and some other companies is the cryptic nature with which they expect you to understand what the remote control is telling you. It's got this little box made of 4 arrows on the top, and you're supposed to know that that's like gonna keep it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of icons on that remote. I've got the same remote as him. And yeah, you definitely need to read up on those icons, because not very many of them are self-explanatory. But that's something new I learned about those. I just wonder if it works if you have a multi-head unit, because I do know that if you have more than one indoor head unit on an outdoor compressor, you have to make sure they're all on the same settings.
Otherwise, it's going to be trying to make heat in one head potentially and cool in another.
Yeah, and it won't even do it, I think. like the system just won't function.
Yeah, because the refrigerant can't flow both directions at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Well, so.
Seems like there's always these ins and outs that you guys talk about in terms of.
Oh, I know. And so
getting it to operate the way you want it to.
They're so complicated, right? Like people would really, I think, and oftentimes just want to go to the thermostat and turn it up and have the boiler come on, Mm-hmm. Oh boy. So we get to some questions.
Yeah. Sure.
I just want to say thanks for all of you who write in with information to fill in the holes in our knowledge, which are huge. It's nice to hear from you all. Here's another good one. Okay. So this is from Adam. While it was actually a lot of fun listening to everyone try and pronounce my town's name, on the off chance you want to pronounce it easier, here's a local news clip with the correct pronunciation. So do you have this, Jeff?
Chittenango, Chittenango, Chittenango.
Nice.
You guys are getting fancy.
Chittenango.
So this clip that they sent him is the local football coach of this small village of like 5,000 people talking about why their team has this winning tradition, and it's hilarious. It's like small towns everywhere. I'm going to try not to butcher your town's name, Adam. Chittenango is like in the smack dab center of New York State, so all of you should go there and check it out because it looks like a cool little place. He says, the house my wife and I bought last fall is an unusual cape in that it has a fairly deep overhangs on the front and back. The shake siding on the front and back under the overhangs is in very good shape, but the shake siding on the gable ends, where there are no overhangs, is in terrible condition and needs to be replaced. My wife and I would like overhangs on the gable ends before replacing the siding and to give the new siding the same protection as the front and back. So our question is twofold. The first part is a design question. Hello, Kiley. Can we add overhangs without making the house look stupid? So let's go there, Kiley. What do you think? Can we put overhangs on this?
I'm still struggling with this because the functionality of the overhangs is undeniable. In fact, just before he sent this, the day before, I had sent a message to Matt saying, I think overhangs are the solution to everything.
Right?
We all need big fat overhangs.
It's true.
And yeah, it's not in keeping with the Cape style, but at the same time, he's got pretty significant overhangs on the rest of his house. I don't know. I'm struggling because the function is, I support that. And then again, when he adds those overhangs, his house is going to look pretty top heavy because of that big fat pediment in the front. So I don't have a strong opinion. Because I just can't decide.
Let's dig into the rest of this question, and then maybe it'll become clear. And he says, should we add the overhangs only at the top of the gable end, or should we also wrap the overhang from the front and back around the gable ends between the first and second floors? So this house has a little tiny dormer on the front, and he wants to know if the new gable overhang should return around this little tiny gable on the front.
Is that what you would call that? A gable? I wasn't sure how to refer to that.
Or a dormer, maybe.
It is kind of a strange dormer sort of because it protrudes from the house. It's almost as if they took a porch and just put it's like a hybrid between a porch roof and a gable dormer. It's kind of a strange We've been getting a lot of unique houses that are that I've never seen anything like before. This is
with big fat overhangs.
Yeah.
Well, you guys listening should definitely go to the website and take a look at this house
It's
because
a really
very
interesting little house.
It's difficult to explain, and it's cute as heck. It is cute as heck.
Yeah, it's got character.
The second question is structural. How do you add overhangs to an existing house without them falling off? Is this a matter of needing lots of structural screws or lag bolts, or would visible support brackets be required? We realize that adding overhangs would require a new roof, but per your GBA article, if we want to control our ice dam problems, we need a new roof anyway. Thank you, Adam R. He says, P.S. I'd like another sticker. Is there a limit to how many I can get? I want to try and compete with Barbara for the largest collection.
How many does she have?
She probably only has one. The stickers have been on lockdown for weeks now. So I promise you all, when I can get back in the office, if you email me, I will send the backlog of stickers I owe you all. I got an even bigger surprise, so you all need to stay tuned to the end of the show today because it's going to blow your mind. Anyway, back to this question.
Way to keep them. Stay tuned.
Adam, I love your house. I think you're going to screw it up if you put overhangs on the gables.
Yeah.
And honestly, the siding for the age of the house is in pretty darn good shape, man. Adam and I were corresponding. I shared his emails with you guys yesterday, right? And we talked a little bit about how much money he has to spend on this. And frankly, I don't think he's going to be able to add outsulation to put the insulation layer on the roof, get a new roof, and put these overhangs on for the amount of money he has. So, Adam, your house has what are called as striated shingles, and you can actually buy these things on Amazon. I would be really tempted to take this on yourself, man, because frankly, for the amount of money you have, I don't think you're going to get all this work done, right? And, as far as getting a contractor to put insulation on your house, it's not very big, but people tend to charge a lot of money for that. And I don't know exactly why. It's not all that complicated, but it's just something people don't do a lot of. And, finding a contractor who's willing to do that kind of work we've talked about is challenging, right, Rob?
Yeah. I mean, it's becoming more and more common. People are becoming more educated about it, but I would still think a majority of people are of the average local contractor. I mean, I can't really speak for the contractors, but it certainly is. Every house, especially insulation retrofits, there's a couple of things. One, it's hard to justify the investment, especially on a complicated exterior where you have a lot of strange seams and flashing details.
This house is not that, though. This is a very simple form. It lends itself well, I think, to it.
Well, with all of the overhangs and the dormers and stuff, it could get pretty complicated. But the point is that it's hard to justify the amount of work, especially if you're on a tight budget, to do all that stuff. I mean, I'm the first person to say that adding overhangs, I would never build a house without a reasonable overhang. And as much as I like modern aesthetics, I think the benefit of protecting the siding is worth it. But in a situation where your siding is in reasonably good shape, I mean, I'd focus more on things like I noticed that his siding on his roofing, on his dormers, is too close to the shingles.
Yeah.
They recommend 2-inch gaps there, which a lot of people don't like the look of. But if you want those shingles to last, you got to keep them up off of the edge.
You're
of the
talking
roof.
the sidewall shingles. If you want the siding to last, you have to keep it up off the roof because it's wicking up water.
Yes.
And you should definitely prime the ends of those, and they all need to be cut, right? Because they have to be cut on an angle.
Yep.
So when you're done cutting, you got to make sure those are primed. And as Rob suggests, if you keep it up 2 inches, that's best. Keeping it up any amount is better than none.
Yeah. So I think, and I deal with this so much with my old house, is that you got to have to kind of pick your battles sometimes, because there's an ideal scenario if money was no object, but there's also reasonable compromises to get a comfortable house that you can afford to live in.
I would like to add that, Adam was worried about doing this work because it's up high. I was very, very fearful of heights when I started out as a carpenter. And The secret for me is having good staging, having good equipment to work off, things you can trust, things you know are not going to fall down, right? Yeah. So maybe you rent pipe staging from a supply house, or maybe you buy Alumapoles and sell them when you're done. Like just have good gear, and working up at height shouldn't be any different than working on the ground.
Yeah, go on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, and any day of the week you'd probably find some cheap scaffolding or pump jacks or something like that on there that you could use.
And put up railings that are sturdy, like make yourself comfortable up there. And it helps a lot. He asked about adding overhangs to a house that doesn't have them. You can do that to a degree with ladders, right? That means you have two pieces of lumber with short pieces of lumber arranged between them, much like a super short stud wall. But you can only do that up to a certain point. And people say 12 inches, but, that's not necessarily the case. It has to be fastened. He has the added complication that he doesn't have OSB or plywood sheathing on his house. He has this Celotex, and you can't really bolt things to that. So you'd have to cut that out and put something sturdier behind it. So, for as well as this house is held up over the years, it was sold first in 1962. God, it's done really well, like fix the siding you have. I'd stick with the architectural style because it's cute and it matches the house. If you don't like the front of it, change it. But,
Yeah, but to his question about fastening overhangs, if someone were to go tackle a job like that, there's a few different ways. One is the up to like 12 inches, maybe, depending on how sturdy the framing is. You can do what you're suggesting is you sort of build a ladder out of 2x, and you use structural screws and go into the framing. If you want to go any deeper than that, the only options you have are either to cut into the original end rafters with barge rafters that extend to the next rafter inside, which then you're getting into some real messy surgery, or to do brackets off of the framing below. But then, of course, then you're dealing with cutting into siding and flashing around that siding. And so a short overhang wouldn't be that complicated on a simple house, but like you said, the style of this house, it might not warrant it.
Here's another thing. So overhangs really matter on the eaves on a gable roof. They matter less on the gables, right? There's just a lot less water coming on that edge of the roof. So like if your house has a choice of having some overhangs, do the eaves. So this house is the right arrangement in that regard.
Right.
Yep.
How do you say that name again, Jeff? Chittenango.
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 Have you guys ever come across a Cape style house that was converted into what he's describing as a craftsman style? Have you ever seen that done before?
Because craftsmen have real shallow roofs, right? It would need some like a shed dormer on the front, and that might work. But I think the house is awesome, and it's a little different.
It is a little different. I found myself looking at it for a long time.
Our next question comes from Alex from Western Massachusetts. I wanted to let you guys know this is our siding special edition here, so here we go. Thank you for the great work on the podcast. You guys are a great source of information and just good company, especially in all this isolation. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether I should continue residing my 1940 house in Western Massachusetts, a project I started last year, or cut bait and paint it instead. I am an ambitious DIYer with a small handyman business. I started this siding project after getting a quote from a painter of about $12,000 to paint the house. I don't like scraping, sanding, and painting, particularly where lead is involved, but I had some siding experience and figured I could reside the whole thing for less and put on a decent WRB. There's diagonal board sheathing, a crumbly old white paper of some kind, and cedar clapboards. I went with Benjamin Obdike's Hydrogap, a drainable house wrap that I saw as a lazy man's rain screen. For siding, I went with pre-painted hardy plank, which seems low maintenance and inexpensive compared to cedar, but nicer aesthetically than vinyl. Having completed one gable end and a tricky section over the garage last year, I'm having trouble getting motivated to start again this year, and I'm questioning the whole premise of the project. Number one, it's more time consuming and expensive than painting. Well, duh. Two, it seems wasteful to throw out all the old cedar clapboards, and maybe an aesthetic mistake. A friend said the other day the sections with hardy plank looked too uniform, almost like vinyl. He must have cried when he heard that, right?
I'm sure.
3, the height bothers me. It's easy enough to paint on a ladder, but I'm not sure how I would work on the siding comfortably in some high spots. 4, I hear you can't get away with less scraping and sanding. You can get away with less scraping and sanding if you use a primer like Mad Dog. Isn't that like a bad liquor? Then again, I heard Peter Yost say on the Pro Talk podcast the other day that when you dense pack the walls in an old house with cellulose, you better improve your moisture control, which was very unnerving because we had the walls dense packed a year ago. I am sure, Alex, you are not the only person who was a little unnerved by Peter Yost's observation. What do you think? Keep plugging away at the hardy plank or paint instead? What would you do, Alex? Well, I'm going to let you go here first, Rob, because you take on big projects. Yeah.
Well, you're the one who switched your siding plan halfway through your barn build, though, but I'll get to that later. So, I deal with the same kind of thing on my house. It's like I've got a 2-story house with a bunch of different additions poking out here and there, just similar to his house. And if it was a simple ranch house, 1-story, simple gable ends, I would have no qualms about tackling a project like he's talking about. But it's a tough call when you're a busy person and you got a lot of other projects going on. And but he does make a good point about what Peter Yost was saying about moisture control. I mean, if you've got leaky exterior walls, you got to be careful. I mean, that's probably more important to deal with flashing details than it is with rain screen details on clapboard siding. But I don't know. I'd have a tough time making this choice. I mean, he's in the middle of the project. It still seems like he's got a lot to go, but I probably would keep going on it. I don't know.
Yeah. So if you stop, do you tear off the hardy plank and put cedar back up? Like what the heck?
I was wondering too.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the hardy plank isn't that much different from his clapboards, so I honestly wouldn't be as worried about that aspect of it. I mean, if he did a nice job painting the other sides, I mean, it's also not unusual for old houses to have had siding repairs done on one side.
I'm going to suggest something completely different and rip off the hardy plank and the cedar clapboards and put on cedar shakes because that's my favorite siding.
Yeah, right. Go back and redo all the stuff.
Throw in all of the work you've just done.
I don't know.
Go get some more expensive material.
Honestly, I mean, he's been into the windows a bit and flashing details on the old part of the house. So maybe he has a good idea of what it might look like underneath the windows that he would have to do on the sides that he hasn't done yet. And if he felt like it was in good shape and there wasn't any signs of major rot, maybe I'd feel comfortable just doing the paint job. I mean, you got to do what makes you feel comfortable. And yes, the ideal situation would be certainly to continue with the project. But if the condition of the walls underneath there wasn't bad when he tore open the other walls, I might be okay with just continue doing the paint on the other sides. But that's just me.
Jeff, you got any thoughts on this crazy project?
I mean, I would find it hard to change horses in midstream, but
I think you should.
That's where I'm coming down to. You got to see this through, man, Alex. You got to finish your project. He did such a nice
job too. He would have to do that. I mean, how long would the paint job last if that's all he did? Right? He'd have this one side of his house that was.
That's a good point because the thing is with the dense packed insulation, old houses that have leaky walls, the paint tends to last a lot longer. But once you put a moisture holding insulation behind those walls, that's when you start getting moisture moving through the siding and forcing that paint off a lot earlier. In fact, some of the earliest cellulose insulation research, I think Joe Stieberg talks about this in some of his classes. What when they first started experimenting with blown-in cellulose insulation, they would see this paint coming off houses super quickly because of it. So
and he has board sheathing, board sheathing
very
is
open.
Very open. Yeah, I think you got to see this thing through, and I think the drainable house wrap is better than non-drainable house wrap. You know, when you do change the hygrothermal properties of an old house, you know, a rain screen, a real rain screen is safest, but you know, I get that that's like not realistic or practical in many cases. So, Alex, I think we're deciding you need to finish this. Keep sending us pictures. No, it's not fun. No, working up on the high spots is not fun.
But on the upside, he doesn't have to do all that scraping.
Yeah.
So.
And you know,
that sounds miserable.
It's kind of terrible to throw the cedar away. Maybe someone can use that.
Yeah, something can be done.
Yeah, maybe put that out for sale on some
lead-coated cedar clapboards, free.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody wouldn't take those for another patching up an old house.
Oh,
and
probably.
the good thing is that he's the pictures of the side that he still needs to work on look like they're all straight shots with no irregular bump outs. He's got to unfortunately deal with his main surface panel, which is going to be in the way. And it looks like he's got some mini splits too. So, I mean, that's going to complicate things a little bit, but
he definitely picked the hardest parts first.
Yeah. I mean, you know, a few pump jacks and a few weekends, he could probably get that, you know, that side done up.
You know, he's going to do it.
He's going to finish. He's going to finish.
Yeah. I think he will.
I think we should take bets. Anyone out there who has bets on bet on what Alex is going to do with his siding, Rob will take that bet. Well, this next question comes from Tony, and I know I'm going to massacre this town, Issaquah. Did I say that right, Kiley?
You did.
Where is it?
It's 18 miles east of Seattle.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Okay. First off, love the podcast. Making my way through all 240 plus podcasts you've done so far. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
I know. Sounds like torture to me.
I agree.
Hey, don't say that.
Is whether or not I should air seal and insulate my crawl space walls or just put down a vapor barrier and leave the vents. I live in Issaquah, Washington, 18 miles east of Seattle. The house is a 1,300 square foot, 1961 ranch at the base of Tiger Mountain, one of many built in the area for families of the loggers who worked the hillside. When we bought the house, it was heated with baseboard heaters, which have since been removed. It's now heated with a ductless heat pump with a ceiling cassette in the main living area, supplemented with a small Cadet electric wall heater in the 2 bedrooms. The crawl space is 2 feet high with no vapor barrier and no mechanicals except plumbing. The crawl space seems mostly dry except for one corner with some graining issues on the exterior of the house that I'm currently working on. I haven't checked the humidity level, but I know that we run a dehumidifier in the living area of the house and have to empty a gallon per day or so. I've listened to many of your podcasts and read many articles about it, and it seems like sealing the crawl space is desirable, but one of the things I read was Martin Holliday's article, Building an Unvented Crawl Space, in which he cites a couple of studies that said, in the Northwest, vented crawl spaces work acceptably most of the time. So back to my original question, should I build an unvented crawl space or should I keep the vents? I know I'm going to put down vapor barrier at the very least. If the answer is I should build the unvented crawl space, how should I condition it? I don't have any heating ducts that I can tap into. Can I just put a dehumidifier in the crawl space and call it good? Or do you think I would need to put some registers in the floor to connect the crawl space to the living area? It would be very hard to convince my wife to do that, I'm certain. Thanks for all the information and entertainment over the years. I recommend your show to everybody. Thanks, Tony. Do you want to hit this one, Ron?
Well, I did actually look at Martin's article, and he points out Washington State University Extension Energy Program study where they were saying they did testing on several houses in that region, and they said because they have different humidity levels, sort of the opposite of what we have in winter and summer, that you can get away with a vented crawl space. And there's several people at those some of those research centers that argue that it's preferable, especially with concerns for radon in those areas as well. But I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of experience with anybody in sort of the latest building science circles recommending vented crawl spaces. So I'm not so sure I'm qualified to answer that question. I mean, the thing is, if you're going to do a vented crawl space, you would think that you'd want to seal it up at the floor level. You wouldn't want to necessarily just put a vapor barrier down. Maybe I'm not quite understanding that properly, but I would think that you'd want to make sure if you're going to have that crawl space vented, you would want it to be separate from your living space. But still, I think most of the science that I see points to the benefits of a sealed up crawl space.
I don't know a lot about vented crawl spaces in the Pacific Northwest, but I do know that the pioneer builders, the Eulers, do this routinely, and I've heard from other folks it's the right thing to do in this particular case. In the Southeast and other places where crawl spaces are common, it's a bad idea, but up here in the Pacific Northwest, it seems to work pretty well. And I think the vapor barrier on the ground is going to help and get that grading issue. And if it's not wet in there and nasty,
right,
what's there to worry about, right?
That's what I was kind of wondering. It doesn't seem like he really has a problem.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is it says they typically have hot, dry summer conditions compared to our very humid summer conditions, and that's really the main. What you have to understand is the main reason not to vent a crawl space, and it's similar to the conversation we had about vented attics in a previous episode, is that the whole problem is if you have the dew point happening inside a space where you're having a lot of moisture load.
Yeah, because the outside air has got tons of water vapor in it, right? And then it comes under your cool crawl space and it can't hold as much, so it condenses on stuff.
Yep. So if the temperature isn't a problem, or if the humidity level isn't a problem, then having that air moving through there is not going to be a problem.
So sleep easy, Tony. This is Elizabeth. Hello, podcast. I would love to get the podcast's input on reducing sound transmission between our main floor and lower level, which is a walkout basement, and a new construction home we plan to break ground on this fall. We've used the GBA model as our starting point, and we're wondering if we can make a swap from the 2 layers of drywall glued together to a layer of spray foam. So the GBA detail that she's referring to has, a drywall layer, and glued to another drywall layer, and it's got resilient channel, and then that's connected to the framing. And the resilient channel does the decoupling, and the 2 layers of drywall provide the mass that's going to theoretically stop sound waves or slow them, right? So it seems to me that spray foam would increase the mass of the barrier and would seal better between joists than drywall sheets cut to size. Also, spray foam could be less expensive than a drywall/glue sandwich when you factor in the labor costs. So, I happen to know a little bit of sound transmission by means of Bonnie Schnitta, who is an acoustician with Sound Sense, and she does much of her work in the Hamptons and other very wealthy places, building home theaters and making restaurants and those kind of spaces more comfortable for people to be in. And she is an extremely interesting and smart lady. And she told me years ago that sound travels in 2 ways. It's either through the air, and to solve that problem, you want an airtight assembly, like electrical boxes, can lights, ductwork are things that sound can move through and get into the other parts of the house. And you need to stop those movements. And one of the things you can do is to not have can lights, or if you have receptacles on both sides of a partition wall, for example, you don't put them in the same stud bay. You offset them so that there's not a conduit from one room to the other. The other way sound moves is through the structure. And that means that sound waves are physically vibrating the parts of the house. And those are most commonly very low frequency sounds, like the subwoofer on your home theater. And you can hear those kind of sounds when you hear people drive by with their kicking car stereos, right? It's like those kind of things you need to decouple. So that's why the resilient channel, or there are other strategies, like the article I did with her was she's used these rubber isolators to separate the wall surfaces from the framing of the room. So you need someone who knows what they're doing to design assemblies to stop sound. And it depends on how loud you're trying to stop. if you want to be able to have your home theater, have 100 decibel sound, like it's way harder to do that than if you just want to stop a conversation from being able to be heard upstairs. So you first got to decide what your needs are, and then you need an assembly that can do it. And a spray foam might be helpful or it might not. It's definitely not going to help with the low frequency transmission because those sound waves are still going to be able to reach the framing. It's probably going to help a lot with the sound traveling through the air because, as you suggest, you've stopped that movement. So,
yeah, and you know what, Patrick, to add to that,
how can you add to that?
Well, to sort of clarify and expand on one of the things you mentioned is like one of the ways that sound transfers is through the actual physical objects that are in the barrier between your spaces. And you mentioned decoupling, and then there's also dampening and mass for sound absorption. So basically absorption, dampening, and decoupling are the three ways that you can prevent sound from moving through objects. And depending on how far you want to go with that, you can do a single one of those methods or a combination of those methods. And you mentioned the channel. There's a company that I saw at IBS this year, Acoustical Solutions, that sells all kinds of rubber mounts for that channel to take it one step further. And then I've also seen a bunch of articles where people use strips or sheets of EPDM as isolation barriers between drywall and framing.
Another product that is common in these assemblies is what's described as mass-loaded vinyl. And so if you want to stop sound, you want something with a lot of density, and ideally it's flexible, right? So when you have these acoustic glues that people use between drywall layers, it's goopy, and that's helping to stop sound waves. Similarly, mass-loaded vinyl, which looks a lot like vinyl flooring that weighs like 10 times what you think it should, is fastened to the framing, and it does, it's heavy and flexible. So once again, it helps stop the sound transmission. It's fascinating stuff, right?
It is. What about just straight up acoustical panels? I mean, how effective are those? I don't have any experience.
So
with
like them. Bonnie, when restaurants call her and say like people can't hear their own conversations because of the din of surrounding noise, oftentimes that's one of the strategies she uses. Like in mechanical rooms of apartment buildings or these high-end condos, they'll use those panels to dampen the sounds from spreading to the units, the housing units. So like I said, you need someone who knows all the ways to stop sound or slow it down, and talk to them. And first, you got to figure out what you're talking about.
And we've had a few articles on both Fine Homebuilding and GBA, plus I found some good resources online that really explain the methods of sound transmission that could be helpful, and I'll put those in the podcast notes.
I can tell you that some of the things that people think work really well do not. Like Homosoda is this kind of papery, fibrous panel product that they use in multifamily dwellings, and that's pretty good at stopping like impact sound, like footsteps and stuff like that, but it's not very effective at other ways sound is transmitted. So, I mean, there are smarter people than us to answer this question.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, huh?
There's a lot to it. So, did you guys see the note from Stephen? He was searching one of the home centers, and for those of you who go to the podcast page, it'll be obvious because it says Lowe's, was looking for nail plates, right? And these are the things you put over pipes and wires when they're too close to the edges of framing to keep them from getting damaged when you hang drywall or install trim or whatever. And so Lowe's had some helpful suggestions when he did this search, and it included a still life with lemon print that was extremely lovely because it had, I'm assuming, the associated plate with a still life painting instead of stopping nails, which is an easy thing to assume, right?
Sure.
So, but that's kind of funny. I've had similar experiences when I search for one thing on the Home Center website and get something completely off the charts weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes the common keywords for a search are way too common. And then when you think you know exactly what you're searching for, you can't figure out the right words to use to isolate the garbage that comes up instead.
That's true.
So for those of you listening out there, you probably thought that was the very exciting thing I was going to talk about was the bad search results from the home center. But it's not. This is bigger than that. Look at this.
Patrick.
Do you see that? That is an FHB podcast t-shirt, which are now available in the Teespring store. And we will put those up on the podcast page, a link to that, so you can all get one out there. I bought this with my own money, Kiley.
I know you did. I'm planning to buy one with my own money, too.
So
and
those of you
for
out
any
there...
of the women listening, there's women's sizes, too.
Get your podcast t-shirt, wear it with pride, take a picture of it, send it to us. I swear to God, when the lockdown is over, I will get a sticker out to you for buying one of our t-shirts too. So if you don't have a question, you don't have a comment, it's an easy way to get, yeah.
And you know what? I think we've even got it in, I think, a few different colors too. So you have some choices there.
Yeah.
It's super good looking. It's our art director, Rodney Diaz's logo, which is very cool. And I was super psyched when it came in the mail yesterday.
So how do you like it, Patrick? Is it comfortable? Because I haven't seen one in person yet.
It's freaking awesome. The one thing I would tell people is it runs a little small. And my physique is definitely improved by this tight t-shirt, I got to tell you.
Nice.
I'm going to get a GBA t-shirt. That's the one I'm going to get.
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually have them for Green Building Advisor, Fine Homebuilding.
Hey, stop it. Let's get them to buy our podcast t-shirts first, all right?
Of course.
You're such a cheerleader.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff, Rob, and Kiley for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find the podcast. And please buy a podcast t-shirt as a show of support. Thank you all so much for listening. Thanks you guys for hanging out with me today. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.